Hello, it's Eve, the Creative Curator. Welcome back to my channel. Please do give it a like, this video a like, subscribe if you want to see more from me, and hit the bell for notifications when I post a new video. We're in May, we're the 2nd of May. Yesterday I posted a vlog, totally unrelated to what I do here at the Creative Curator, but you know, it was a trip with my niece. For every day this month I will be posting a new video. Those videos are pre-recorded. They are in fact course content from my Sewing Skills for Beginners course, which I am now no longer selling and making available for free. Part of the reason for this is because I have no wish to teach sewing. Just keeping it real. I love sewing. I love sewing for myself. I love sewing for others. I do not enjoy the whole teaching aspect of it. I come alive when I'm talking about draping and pattern making and contouring and drafting and fashion design. Those are the things I love doing. So sewing will feature here on my channel as it pertains to anything that I might be teaching to do with draping, pattern making, fashion design. But otherwise there'll be no more tutorials sewing wise going forwards from me. So the next however many days of May, every day I'll be dropping a new video which will have come from my sewing course. So I will start it with like learn to sew and then whichever lesson it is, so you can easily find them. I'll create a playlist so that you can easily find them. If you are a sewing beginner and you want to start learning to sew your own clothes, that's where you should start. And yeah, moving forwards, don't ask me for any sewing videos because I'm not doing it. I just don't, it's not fun. And it's, for me, it's quite wasteful to make a sewing video showing the sewing process of something when there are so many people out there already that do that, you know. Yeah, so there we go. I'm going to roll with the first lesson. This lesson is, so it's an overview of how sewing machines work. It is talking about the sewing machine anatomy so you can understand the different parts of your sewing machine. And we also cover the basic sewing machine tools as well so that you know when you open up your sewing machine, you know what you're looking at. So I hope you enjoy it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and yeah, I'll see you at the end. So today, in this lesson, I wanted to talk to you about how sewing machine works. I've got my Bernina 1008 in front of me, which is a mechanical sewing machine. There are two types of sewing machine. Well, like home sewing machine that you would sew with. One would be a sewing machine like my Bernina, which it's a lock stitch machine. So it locks an upper thread with a bobbin thread to create a stitch. So you've got two lines of thread basically when you're creating your stitches. The other type is a chain stitch, and that is when it's one thread and it creates a chain that's going along and along and along. If you're here, you probably have a regular sewing machine that creates a lock stitch, which is great. Chain stitches are terrible because they easily unravel. That's why a lock stitch is best, and hopefully you have a machine that allows you to do straight and zigzag stitch. The reason for this is because some fabrics would be better with a zigzag stitch, like knit fabrics for instance. Unless of course you have an overlocker or serger as it's also known as, or a cover stitch machine, but those are like other types of sewing machine. So your thread is obviously threaded and I'm going to show you how to thread a machine in a separate video, but let me just lower down. So obviously you'd have your sewing machine foot, and then you have your thread. Mine is trying to come out. Oh, it did. Interestingly, by the way, when you lower your foot, it tightens your tension discs so that you struggle to pull the thread through. And when they're raised, it's actually much easier to pull the thread through. As you can see, like, ah. And if I lower it, it's much trickier. Like it just strengthened the tension. I'm going to show you separately how to thread a sewing machine, the whole thing, but just to give you an overview of how it works. When your needle is threaded up and your machine is all set to go, now you can watch me try to thread this, right? Because I can't get so close because the camera's in the way. There we go. Pull it behind, pop it underneath. So let me see if I can lower it further so you can see. So when I go down with my needle, you can't see in there, can you? But my needle is attempting to come down, and this is the bobbin house. You can see there's a hook system. Can you see it moving? Let me grab that thread back up. There we go. And what that does is when the needle on the upper goes down with the thread, you can see it's been here. It's all gone in and is coming back out again. That loops and connects. There it is. Can you see it going past, and it scoops up the bobbin thread, which would obviously be your bobbin installed. And that then creates like an in, out, like lock stitch. It locks it into place. Let me just pull that thread through, and then let me empty my bobbin. So I'm going to pop my bobbin in quickly, and then when I repeat what I just did, so the needle is going in, and you can see that now more clearly scooping up. If I pull, and there is the bobbin thread. So you saw how it wrapped around and it scooped up the thread, and that is how a lock stitch machine works. Genius, really. Sewing machine was invented, the first one, back in the 1800s, and obviously the technique was finessed. The patent, I think, was in the late 1800s, and then from the early 1900s everyone started sewing, and the rest is history. So that is how a sewing machine works. So this is my Bernina 1008. I have had her for about 20 years now. She is a second-hand machine. You can see that she has been scratched from, I think it was Wimbledon College of Arts, which is where I did my fashion and textiles and foundation in foundation in art and design. So she's secondhand, so she's a lot older than 20 years. She's beautiful. She's called a mechanical machine, and I call her a she because, I don't know, I just always have. Let's give you an overview. This I have purposely left off to show you. This is my sewing kit. Like, this came with my sewing machine. It has like the bobbins, the sewing machine feet. It normally has like the lint and the multi-purpose gadget and everything, but I've just removed those for another lesson that I'm recording. It clicks on like this, and quite often you'll find, I always struggle with this, but there's a way to get it to click onto the back. Like so. And what that does is it gives you a bigger work area. Let me now move it forward. So that's now increased my work area by 50%. Let's start with the main section on the side. So this is where my power cable goes in. You will doubtless have a similar situation where you need to plug in a cable, like so. Oof, and that will power it. This is my power dial. So at 0, at 1 is without a bulb, and 1 with a bulb. You can see over here that the light has come on. So it's nice and easy. You might just have a button or a switch. You'll see on my other machine that I have just a switch that powers on. And then this, of course, is what we use to turn, if we're hand turning our needle for any reason. In order to load my bobbin, I actually have to release this hand wheel, the rigid section, which I can't do with one hand, and I'm currently holding my camera in the other. But I will show you that in a few moments. And the reason for that is when you unlock it, it will disengage the needle, which means you can then load your bobbin, which is here. Okay, depending on how modern or whether your machine is an electronic or computerized, you may or may not have this section, like the additional section for bobbin situations. Let me turn her back a little. I love this machine, but I can't take her anywhere with me because she's so heavy. Then we have the spool section. So this is a spool of thread. And here's another spare bobbin, so I have them everywhere. I need to reload that one actually. These are your spool holders. This one's stuck, so he only gets bobbins on him now. And obviously you place your thread on your spool of thread on your spool holder, and you would run it through and down in order to thread your machine. Very important. Some of them will lay flat. The one that I used last summer when I was back in the UK for pandemic, my mum's actually lays like this instead. And it has like a little knobble on the end to hold it in place. So different machines will have a different way of putting your spool in position, but that is what it is and that is what it does. This is your bobbin loader. You would put your bobbin on, and then when you click it, you're basically telling your machine that you want to load the bobbin. This is the point at which that I have to release this dial in order to disengage the sewing machine needle and press a foot action. What do we call those? The feed dogs. So yeah, that's loading of the bobbin. There is a separate lesson on how to load your bobbin and install it. This for me is my range of stitch options. I don't have an awful lot of options when it comes to stitch types, which is fine with me because I use my sewing machine for sewing. I don't use it for decorative purposes. I just need a straight stitch, a zigzag stitch, a knit stitch, and that's all I really need. There are so many machines now with a lot of different stitch types and styles. Do you need them all? Debatable. As a beginner, you don't. As a beginner, I heartily recommend that you have a basic machine that just does a couple of stitches, because you're going to then spend more time learning how to use those stitches properly to create your different seams, your French seam, your flat felled seam, all of the above, sewing curves, mitered corners, all that kind of thing. If you've got fancy stitches like this, you might just be a bit like, oh wow, you know, squirrel, shiny, what do we call it? Shiny squirrel syndrome or something? I forget. But the more options you've got, the more chances are you're not going to focus on what really matters when you're learning to sew, and that is just practicing your stitch quality. Mine has like a funny little dial. If it's a modern thing, you might just have like a little LCD screen that says, okay, put this number in, and then you'll get that stitch type. As we move along, so this is obviously the guide, one of the thread guides. There are several. And we take the thread through the guide. There's a separate video on threading your machine, so I'm not going to go into it now, but this helps to guide the thread and keep it on track. This is our tension dial. So when we are dealing with the tension for the upper thread only, so whether the tension's too tight, too loose, or perfect, we would move this, and that will affect the tension discs, which are just inside. And then this is for the bobbin. So when loading the bobbin, the thread will come from the spool through the thread guide and to the backwards around the bobbin guide and onto the bobbin before you click it in place. But I'm going to show you separately how I do that. This is called a take-up lever. It moves in line with the needle going up and down. As you can see here, the needle is going up and down, and that is done there with the take-up lever. The thread is passed through it, and it helps to just keep the tension in the thread correct. Another guide. Here we're going down, we're guiding the thread through, keeping it under control. Another wire guide, which helps to, let me just lower the camera a little bit. So again, another little guide that you just guide the thread with. Then of course you have your guide above your needle. This is your needle shank. You can't see it, let me lower the needle. This is your needle shank. And you have a needle screw, and this holds the needle in place. And then there's another guide here for the thread. This of course is the sewing machine foot shank. This one has a little clip at the back that I can press, and then the foot drops off. Here's a foot I prepared earlier to show you. If I lower this down, you can see that it just clips on and clips off, clips on and clips off. And then I would press the button at the back and it drops off. This is a more modern machine, clip on, clip off. They're very popular. Older ones, as I mentioned before, like my Singer, will have a screw on situation for your sewing machine foot. Below that we have, these are called the feed dogs, and these work to guide the fabric through and underneath so that the needle can stitch. On a regular sewing machine, on a regular setting, they are raised like this. If you have a machine like mine that can do darning or can lower them, then oh, boom. And away they've gone. I will not be able to get those back up now. I need to get my awl because they have a struggle. They're very old. They're a bit weary. They can't pop up by themselves, so I need to help her now. If we open up the bobbin, now my machine is a side loading bobbin. Some of them are top loading. Top is great because you can see how low your bobbins get in, but this one also works really well for me. Within here we have a bobbin, and it is in a bobbin case. And I'm going to cover bobbins in more detail. And that is where the bobbin is housed. In here, moving across, we have, so this is a dial for my stitch width when I'm zigzagging. This is my position for my needle. So by standard, it's centrally positioned or aligned. I might want it to the left, or I might want it to the right. This is mostly when you are using, if you're using like a zipper foot that obviously sits one side or the other side of the needle, then you would need to move your needle accordingly so you're not hitting certain things in certain places. It might be that you want to get a very close edge stitch, and that if your needle is very right aligned, that you can get it down to like 1 or 2 millimeters. Again, it's not essential that you use this stitch location modifier dial if you have it, but that's what it will do. And I can show you here how it's moving from one side to the other, and that's center. This is my zigzag width, which I just touched on. This is my buttonhole. Every sewing machine nowadays comes with a buttonhole option. This is a manually or mechanically operated buttonhole. If you've got an electronic or computerized one, you'll literally have a one-touch button situation, which is a lot more easier to do. You probably don't need my help, but this, I've got a video on YouTube actually showing this process. I do need to update it, but this makes buttonholing super simple, along with the presser foot that I have that does buttonholes, which you will find in the 2 lessons from now in the sewing machine feet lesson. Then we have stitch length. So very rarely will you need more than a 3. I normally sew at a 3 stitch length. Number 5 I use if I'm basting something, so if I'm sewing like long stitches in order to gather fabric up, or if I'm just basting. If I'm sewing zigzag stitches, quite often I'll come really low, and if I'm sewing darts, then I might start off at 3, and then as I'm getting closer to the dart point, I will make my stitch length slower and shorter, just because you get a nicer finish that way. And of course, the reverse for this machine is to literally just flick it up like the lever. Flick the lever up. It's not like a lever, it is a lever or a lever if you're American. Quite often on machines nowadays, modern machines, you'll have a little button that you will press and it will backstitch for you, or reverse. You won't necessarily need to have something like this. And then this is the dial that takes me from sewing on the right hand side to darning on the left hand side, which also saw the collapse of my feed dog. Hey ho. Then there's a separate option here, the green and the red, and this is connected to my stitch type. Okay, so obviously we have the green, ta-da, which is pretty much standard, and if I want any of those more decorative stitches, then I would move it to the right, so it's, oh no, that's to the left, so that's on the red, and then I would select my stitch here, and I'm looking at the green line, not the green line, sorry, the red line rather than the green line. I really value having a mechanical sewing machine. I know it's not for everyone, especially this one, because it is actually brand new. It's really expensive. I think it's like, well, I don't know actually. Second hand, it was £400. Brand new, I think it's upwards of, it's close to £1,000, which is a lot of dollars. As I have said, I've had this for 20 years. I've never had a problem with it. I very naughtily haven't had it serviced either. I maintain it myself, not necessarily to the best of its needs. I do need to get it serviced. It's tricky here in the Netherlands because I don't know where I would take it. So I take very good care of her, and she sews a lot of different things for me very, very beautifully. So that is the anatomy of Bernina 1008. If you have a mechanical machine, then you will doubtless find that yours has a lot of similarities. If you have a electronic or computerized, you'll have some things obviously that are the same, like the needle shank and the presser foot shank and a place for your bobbin and a power button, and you'll have a tension situation. But things like your stitch style, your stitch length and your stitch width, those will be like part of an LCD screen, touch screen, or a button situation. So those probably aren't as relevant to you here and now. But yeah, if any of that doesn't make sense, of course, do let me know and I will help you as best I can. I'm going to be looking at the basic sewing machine tools. Now, everyone will have a different idea on what a sewing machine tool is. For me, it's the things that you absolutely need to have at hand. When you are working with your sewing machine. Obviously, a sewing screwdriver. My brain went numb for a minute. So with my Singer sewing machine, the presser feet, which is the next lesson that you'll be learning about, presser feet, but these actually are held in place with a screw. And so I need a screwdriver that is small enough to get in there to tighten and loosen as appropriate. You might also need a bigger screwdriver. Apparently I can't speak today. It depends on how big the screw is on your sewing machine foot, your presser foot. Additionally, you'll notice when you are, and I'll show you this shortly when I, actually you will have seen it in the anatomy, sewing machine anatomy, but when you are putting a needle, a sewing machine needle into the shank area when you're attaching it, you'll need to use a screwdriver in order to secure it. So you really can't get away without a screwdriver. I've been recording this for a few days, so clearly I have the word sewing machine on my brain. So screwdrivers are essential. Next up, of course, we have bobbins. You can't use a sewing machine without a bobbin. It's just how it works. Unless you've got like one that makes chain stitching, then you won't need a bobbin. But most home sewing machines do require bobbins. This is the one for my Singer. This is the one for my Bernina. You can see possibly that they're slightly thinner. They're different widths or depths. And the size is a little off as well. You will want to either get bobbins. I believe in having excess number of bobbins. So for my Singer, I've got 6. For my Bernina, I always have 5 bobbins. For my industrial machine, when I had my studio in London, I had about 50, all loaded with different colours. So that's quite excessive. You probably don't need that many. I would recommend having 5. I normally have one preloaded with white, with black, and then other neutral colours. So in here I've also got pink because I was sewing quite a bit with pink, as you can see. Then here's my preloaded black ready to go. The great thing about having a couple preloaded is that because typically you're going to use the same kind of thread. I use Gutermann, sometimes Coats, but Gutermann is my go-to. If you've preloaded your bobbins with that thread, you know that when you're halfway through a project and you've run out of bobbin thread, then you can just quickly pop a new bobbin in without having to like undo everything, like unthread your machine and load up a bobbin and stuff. I am going to be showing you how to thread a bobbin and how to load a bobbin, so we'll cover that in the next lessons. But yeah, these are essential, and if you can afford to do so, I recommend getting a few more specifically sized for your machine, of course. Make sure that you take one with you to a haberdashery store and size it up to make sure it's correct, because a bobbin that isn't the right size will cause you problems with your machine and your stitches and damage your needle and all sorts. So make sure they're the right size. Next up is a stitch unpicker or seam ripper. I have the smaller one. You can see that they have a funny little ball. That's to prevent you from accidentally cutting through. A lot of people use these in the wrong way, so I'll create a mini video showing you exactly how to use it properly to rip your stitch seams. But yeah, even me, I've been sewing for over 30 years. I'm in my early 40s now, and I learnt when I was less than 10 with my gran and my mum, and I still use these quite often because I make mistakes too. That's what happens when you're sewing. Next on the list, we have a needle threader. I recently wrote an article on the website on how to use a needle threader to thread a needle. I don't really use it myself. I got it to test and create the content for the website for the other people that do want to use them, and one for my mum. My mum's riddled with arthritis in her hands and her eyes are not so good. Whenever I'm home, she's like, "Poppet, can you thread the needle, please?" So I thought one of these might be helpful for her. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. I've linked to the blog post anyway where I talk about this. This one is great because it has 2 different sizes, so it has a bigger one. This one is more structured, solid. This one is a little bit finer. For my mum, she would struggle to see that one. Like, that would not be helpful to her. This one is a bit more, the wire's thicker, so that will definitely, she'd be able to see that and she'd be able to poke that through the eye of a needle. So if you do struggle with your hands, if you've got shaky hands, or if you struggle with your eyes and threading needles is tricky, then this is an essential tool. Then we move on to this funny little gadget. And for years, I had no idea what this was. It's called a multi-purpose tool, and it's basically a wedge of plastic with cutouts. And the way it works is when you're sewing fabric, obviously if you're sewing like regular weight wovens or knits, then you can hem pretty nicely. But when you're sewing thicker fabrics like denim or any kind of canvas or even like leather, when you have the multiple, so you might have like a side seam, which of course is like the seam and then your seam allowances, and when you fold it under as a single fold hem, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of fabric, and if you were to fold it under again as a double fold hem, you're going to have 6 or more pieces of fabric. That can make it quite bulky, so when you're sewing along, here's your sewing machine foot, okay? I'm going to show you a separate video how this works because you think I'm being a bit weird. But when you're sewing along and you get to like the lump where everything overlaps, your presser foot is going to struggle to climb it. It's like, if you think of it as being like a little mountain, your presser foot is really going to struggle to get up, and you're going to end up with skipped stitches, and it's just all going to be a bit wonky and not a great stitch line. This tool is great. You can see one side is thinner than the other, and you would literally, as you're approaching like the mountain of multiple seam allowances, you would lower your needle so it's in the fabric, you would lift up the presser foot so it raises, chink, and then you literally slide this in underneath. Then lower your presser foot back down and continue until you get towards the edge of the mound of fabric, and then make sure the needle is lowered down, lift up your presser foot and pop it in the front, and then and then it will just naturally continue sewing. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to create a separate video so you can see that in action. But this is a great little gadget for making sure that if you're sewing any bulky like areas where there's lots of seams connected, really helpful to keep your nice stitch line. This is the penultimate tool that you should have in your basic kit. It is a lint brush. So mine's double-ended. I've got a, what's that called? It's like a bottle brush, isn't it? And then like a sweeping brush. Both of these are really great for getting into hard to reach areas, getting rid of lint, that kind of thing. You do need to be careful because you don't want to accidentally damage your machine or put lint where it shouldn't be. But I do have a lesson right in the last module of the course called Maintaining Your Machine, and I'll be showing you how to remove lint with this. And then the final one is I use this. I actually have like a microscopic thing that I ordered about 6 months ago, which would be really good to show you how to apply oil even more strategically, but it's still waiting. They're still waiting on stock. So it's been sat there in my order basket of approved, and they've taken the mini 6 months ago, but it hasn't arrived yet. This is a great little tool. It's not really a tool, it's oil. But your sewing machine is an amazing piece of machinery, and obviously it needs lubrication to keep all those moving parts moving. If you don't lubricate / oil your machine, you are going to run into machine troubles. And so I will be showing you how to oil your machine as well. And again, that will be in the lower section, Maintaining Your Machine. So there you have it. Those are your basic tools that you really need to have. I don't think, like, these are the only ones that I make sure that I have with me, and I'm always calling upon them. I don't think you need anything else. If you have just this, then you will be fine. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.